Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Early life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam early life was marked by hardship and loss. His father Abdullah died before his birth while on a trading mission in the town of Yathrib, north of the Mecca. His mother Amna died when he was 6, leaving his respected grandfather Abdul Muttalib to care for him. 2 years later, his grandfather also died, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to live with his paternal uncle Abu Talib. Despite belonging to the wealthy tribe of Quraysh, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not grow up amid riches. His status as an orphan and his belonging to the clan of Banu Hashim, considered an inferior branch of Quraysh, meant he was not a part of the ruling class. He did, however, accompany his uncle on numerous trading missions to Syria in his childhood, inaugurating him into the age-old nomadic tradition of the Arabs. His reputation as an honest trader led to him being known by two nicknames as Sadiq and Al-Amin, meaning the truthful and the trustworthy. He was thus respected by the Quraysh, and he was regularly trusted with money and business transactions, acting as an arbiter in many cases. By his 20s, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was an accomplished merchant, working as an agent for a wealthy widow. Sorry, working as an agent for a wealthy widow named Khadija radhiyallahu anha. Eventually, his reputation as an honest and reliable man caught the attention of his employer, and when he was 25, Khadija proposed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who accepted despite being several years her junior. Although being surrounded by a polytheistic idol worshipping society, the young Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not get involved in the religion of the Quraysh. The original monotheistic message of Ibrahim and Ismail was a faint memory to most Arabs, but it still held weight for a few known as the Hunafa, singular Hanif, meaning monotheists who refused to accept the hundreds of stone and wood gods. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was one of them. Instead of engaging in the idol worship so rampant in society, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam chose seclusion. He made a habit of retreating to a cave atop a mountain about 5 kilometers from the center of Mecca, where he would sit in silence and reflect on the society and religion that surrounded him in Mecca. The first revelations. According to Islamic tradition, in 610, while sitting in the cave he had come to many times before, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam experienced something new. An angel suddenly appeared to him in the cave, commanding him read. He responded that he didn't know how. Like most people in Mecca, Muhammad was illiterate. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again, the angel demanded he read. Again, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam responded that he was unable to. A third time, the angel demanded he read, and for a third time, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam responded that he was unable to. The angel then recited to him the first verses of the Quran to be revealed. Recite in the name of the Lord who created. He created man from a clot of blood. Recite, and the Lord is the most bountiful, he who hath taught by the pen, who hath taught by the pen, taught, taught man what he knew not. He repeated the words after the angel, who then informed him that he is Gabriel, an angel sent by the one God, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger of God. Shaken and scared, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam rushed home, not knowing what to make of the encounter. He was confronted by Khadija radiallahu anha, who believed his account of the encounter in the cave. She asked her cousin, who was familiar with the Jewish and Christian scriptures, what this could mean. When he heard of what happened, he immediately accepted Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the messenger of his time, like Moses and Jesus before him. Consoled by his wife and her cousin, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam accepted his mission as the messenger of God, and his life as the prophet began. The first person to hear of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam prophethood and accept it was Khadija radiallahu anha, who can be said to have converted immediately upon his return from the cave. He soon began to invite those closest to him to this new religion. His closest companion Abu Bakr, his young cousin Ali, and his house servant Zaid all respected and trusted Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and thus immediately accepted him as a prophet. They began to inform those closest to them, and slowly the number of people who accepted Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam began to grow. The first attempts at proselytizing were coward. Mecca was after all a polytheistic society, and the idea of one God replacing the numerous idols in the Kaaba would no doubt be seen as a threat. Thus, the early months and years of Islam were marked by the development of a secret, hidden group, fearful of society's reaction to them, but submitting to the ideas of this new religion. They were called Muslims, meaning submitters. The word Islam itself, from which Muslim derives, denotes submission to God and His will. Woe to every scorner and mocker who collects wealth and continuously counts it. He thinks his wealth will make him immortal. No, he will surely be thrown into the fire. Quran. At the same time, the core ideas of Islam began to take shape through continuing revelations, which would be shared throughout the community. Strict monotheism, far different from the prevailing religion of Mecca, was a core theme. According to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was only one God. The idols worshipped by the Meccans were nothing more than useless statues of stone and wood, and were incapable of bringing benefit to anyone. The verses also warned of a day of reckoning when all souls would be brought before God to account for their deeds. Those who believed in God and did good deeds would enter an eternal heaven as a reward. Those who did not would have a place in hell and would be eternally tormented. But Islam was not just concerned with theology and life after death. The early verses also denounced social ills that were prevalent in Mecca, with increasing prosperity from the trade routes, with increasing prosperity from the trade routes, distinct social classes developed. The healthy, the wealthy would use their money to fund more caravans that would in turn bring them more wealth. A poor person, meanwhile, continued to be marginalized, doubly so if they didn't belong to a powerful clan. The Quran, the Quran declared such disregarded the Quran declared such disregard for the poor as detrimental to the establishment of a just social order and worthy of punishment in the hereafter. It would be years until the rules regarding society would be laid down, but from early on it was clear that Muhammad ﷺ had come not just to change people's religious beliefs but also society itself. The early revelations repeated these themes numerous times. The verse and chapters revealed in Makkah, which are found towards the end of the Quran, tended to be short and to the point. This worked well for the nascent Muslim community, which was still unknown to the rest of the city. When around fellow believers, the Muslims would discuss the latest revelations among themselves and teach each other. When around non-Muslims, they had to hide their conversion and beliefs. After all, these new ideas would threaten the established social order of Makkah. Social, economic, and tribal equality flew directly in the face of the wealthy and powerful members of the Quraysh. Social revolution is rarely welcomed by those in positions of power. Even if Muhammad ﷺ had not advocated any change in society, the new beliefs alone were a threat to the economic and social position of the polytheists. Because of the Kaaba, Mecca was a religious center for Arabs throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Once a year, Arabs would travel to Mecca for a pilgrimage and to to honor the to honor the hundreds of idols kept around the Kaaba. This meant big business for the Quraysh. Trade was a natural byproduct of the pilgrimage, with people from so many distant lands in the same place at the same time. A natural market evolved which made Mecca a religious, economic, and political focal point of Arabia. And as the facilitators of this trade, the Quraysh stood to make huge profits. Muhammad ﷺ message, however, denied the importance of the idols, emphasizing the unity of God. Without idols, there would be no pilgrimage. With no pilgrimage or Hajj, there would be no business. This was not a scenario that was pleasing to the Quraysh, and the early followers of Muhammad ﷺ knew that. For this reason, there could be no mention of this new religion around the leaders of the tribe. The Muslim community was still small and weak enough that it could not yet come into open ideological conflict with those in positions of power. especially considering the fact that most of the early converts were those who were considered the lowest class of society. Slaves, servants, and the poor made up a large proportion of the early Muslim community, attracted by the equality of all people before God and egalitarian nature of the new religion, where wealth and social status didn't determine a person's worth. Persecution. Eventually, the size of the Muslim community became too large for the rest of Quraysh to ignore. Previously, the Muslims had been able to perform their prayers together in a secluded area on the outskirts of the town, but as their prayer groups grew larger, the chances of them being seen increased. That is exactly what happened as a group of praying Muslims were seen by a group of idol worshippers whose immediate reaction was to ridicule the Muslims and their prayer. At first, the Quraysh were content to view the small community as an abnormality to be mocked until they realized the gravity of these new ideas. Monotheism, social justice, equality, and submission to the rule of God were all threatening theories to the Quraysh. In the eyes of many leading members of Quraysh, the solution was to rid themselves of this new religious and social movement by getting rid of the source, that is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Arab society still had structure and rules. Although Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was an orphan, he was still under the protection of his uncle Abu Talib, who was the leader of the Banu Hashim clan of Quraysh. Abu Talib himself refused to accept Islam, but his dignity and respect for Arab social customs demanded that he protect his nephew. Furthermore, age-old Arab customs dictated that if Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was killed, his clan would have permission to go after his killers, and thus civil war could break out on the streets of Mecca. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself could not be harmed, but the protection that he enjoyed was not extended to his followers, many of whom were not protected by any clan or family. The Quraysh decided to threaten and persecute them in the hopes of discouraging others from joining the new religion. Muslims were thus regularly harassed and deprived of the same rights as polytheists in Mecca. While Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself had protection, he was powerless to stop the oppression of his followers. Quraysh also took steps to prevent the spread of the new religion outside of Mecca. A group of Muslim refugees who escaped to Abyssinia were promised protection by its Christian king, the Negus. The Quraysh sent emissaries after them, hoping to convince the king to give up his protection and send the Muslims back to Mecca to be persecuted. When the Negus heard Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam cousin Jafar recite verses from the Quran about Islamic beliefs regarding Jesus and Mary, he refused to forsake his fellow monotheists, and the Quraysh had to go back to Mecca without the refugee Muslims. But even if Muslims had not escaped to distant lands, distant lands, Islam could still spread beyond Mecca. Thousands of Arabs visited the city each year, and if some of those visitors heard Muhammad's message and saw Quraysh's inability to stop his unorthodox ideas, the status of Quraysh as one of the leading tribes in the peninsula would begin to wane. Alternatively, the visitors would believe Muhammad accept his religion and take it back to their homelands, spreading Islam outside of Mecca and making it harder to stop. All of this led to the extreme measures taken by the Quraysh in 617, approximately 7 years after the first revelations. The Quraysh decided to implement an all-out boycott on Muhammad clan, Banu Hashim, to whom many Muslims belonged. No one was to enter into any business transactions with them, nor marry anyone to a member of the clan. They were even forced into exile in a barren valley just outside of the Mecca. This had disastrous humanitarian effects on the Muslim community. Persecution brought hunger, social isolation, and economic woes to the Muslims and even the non-Muslims who happened to be part of Banu Hashim, such as Abu Talib. The few Muslims not belonging to Banu Hashim, such as Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, did all they could to supply the persecuted group by circumventing the boycott's rules. Although at great personal loss, the boycott was draining on the entire Muslim community, those belonging to Banu Hashim as well as other clans. In the end, the boycott was ineffective in persuading Muhammad to discontinue his preaching, to discontinue his preaching, and it was thus ended after just over a year of enforcement. Despite Quraysh's efforts, more people continued to accept Islam. The boycott also revealed the strength of ties in the young community, as those not a part of Banu Hashim were still willing to sacrifice their wealth and safety to help their brothers and sisters that were being persecuted here. One of the core concepts of Islam, that loyalty to the religion transcended loyalty to a tribe or family, was on full display. The boycott was not without its effect, however. Years of being denied food and access to shelter, coupled with physical abuse, took a toll on the Muslims. The persecution probably played a role in the death of the Prophet's wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, in 619. She had been the first convert and had stood by Muhammad through the adversity he had faced at the hands of Quraysh. The emotional support she provided in the early years was indispensable for the Prophet encouraging him to continue in the face of persecution. The loss was a huge one on Muhammad but it was not the only loss he had to deal with. Soon afterwards, his uncle, who had protected him, Abu Talib, became ill and died. Although he did not accept Islam, he endured persecution like the rest of Banu Hashim and never gave up protection of his nephew. Beyond being another emotional loss for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the death of Abu Talib had huge implication for the Muslim community. Without a strong leader, there was little to protect Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the rest of the Muslim community from the leaders of Quraysh, who were becoming bolder in their attacks on the Muslims, verbally as well as physically. Despite his love for the city of Mecca, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam decided to try to find another city that would accept him and give him more freedom to preach his religion than the Quraysh did. The natural choice was Taif, a town ruled by the tribe of Saqif, 65 kilometers to the southeast of Mecca. He rode out to Taif and met with the three brothers who led the tribe. They unequivocally rejected his proposal that they accept Islam and refused to grant him any form of protection. To make matters worse, on his way out of the city and back to Mecca, a crowd of people from Taif gathered to pelt him with stones and insults, leaving him bloodied. By the time he was safely out of range of the city, Islamic tradition holds that he was visited by the angel Jibril, who asked the Prophet ﷺ if he would like him to destroy the city of Taif between two mountains as punishment for their treatment of the messenger of God. The Prophet ﷺ replied in the negative, stating that he hopes perhaps one of their descendants would one day be a believer. This event would play a huge role in the spiritual connection between Indian Muslims and the Prophet in later centuries. After losing his family's support, being rejected by neighboring tribes, and watching his own followers persecuted for their faith, Muhammad ﷺ recognized that a radical change was necessary if Islam was to survive at all. The opportunity for such a change came from one oasis town 300 kilometers north of Mecca, Yathrib. The two main tribes of Yathrib, Aus and Hazraj, were engaged in a perpetual struggle for power, and that turned deadly in the 610s, further exasperating the problem. Numerous Jewish tribes also lived in Yathrib and had trouble coexisting with the local Arabs. Muhammad ﷺ's reputation as a trustworthy and reliable man was already well known in Yathrib, and it was in 620 when numerous notables from the town traveled to Mecca to seek his emigration to Yathrib to serve as their leader and a mediator of their disputes. Muhammad ﷺ accepted their offer and encouraged his followers in Mecca to make the journey with them, where the oppression of the Quraysh was absent. Muhammad ﷺ himself was one of the last to leave Mecca in 622 when he journeyed with his close friend Abu Bakr, barely eluding Quraysh's plans to have him murdered before he could leave. In Yathrib, which was soon renamed Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara, the Radiant City, officially known as Medina, the city Muhammad would sallallahu alaihi wasallam would find security and the ability to spread Islam away from Quraysh's opposition. इंशाल्लाह मदीना से हम अगली वीडियो में स्टार्ट करेंगे.